ethnicity and ethnic groups, and is an assistant professor at the University of the Philippines, and joining us via telephone from the Philippines. Jake, can you hear us clearly?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to speak and share my views on how ethnicity and ethnic groups may be integrated in disaster risk reduction. I think this is a very important topic. Very important topic now to discuss, and I think we should inquire and we should be asking whether this particular topic or concern is sufficiently addressed in the pre-zero draft post 2015 framework for disaster risk reduction or not. Our interest in studying vulnerabilities in the context of ethnic groups lies on the observation and findings of several studies that ethnic groups are discriminately impacted by disasters. And very often, the most affected, the most marginalized groups, such as ethnic minorities and indigenous people. And having said that, ethnicity and ethnic groups should constitute a major dimension of disaster risk reduction and should be considered in international policies, such as the HFA or the Hugo Framework for Actions, considering that most of the countries of the world are multi-ethnic, and within each country, there are regions, provinces, municipalities, or any other political divisions that may well be considered as multi-ethnic, which is actually the case in the Philippines. And that is why I am a bit dissatisfied with the recommendation, with a particular recommendation in the pre-zero draft to gather disaggregated data only on the impacts of disaster uh, or or the impacts of disaster, taking into account only gender, sex, age, disability. I mean, they're of course very important, but I hope that we can also gather data on the differential impacts of disasters based on ethnicity. So the question now is how we integrate ethnicity and ethnic groups in disaster risk reduction. Integrating ethnicity and integrating ethnic groups are two different but related objectives. Integrating ethnicity means that we consider factors such as language, history, cultural heritage, what else, customs and traditions, or in general culture that determine ethnic identity or ethnicity in disaster risk reduction. In practice, this means use of local language in disaster risk reduction activities or culture sensitive methods and tools to engage ethnic groups in disaster risk reduction. On the other hand, integrating ethnic groups in DRR means that leaders and of course members of ethnic groups themselves participate in all stages and aspects of disaster risk reduction. They must be active actors and must be empowered so that they can influence or better control decisions which affect them. And again, these concerns, I believe, are not fully addressed in a pre-zero draft. But the question is this possible is collaboration possible in a multi-ethnic context? I mean, is collaboration between ethnic groups possible, especially in fragile and conflict affected states? I, uh, I commend the pre-zero draft for considering the issue of conflict, which I think is a key provision to pursue disaster risk reduction despite ethnic conflicts. But I also agree with the position of ODI CDKN that there is still a lack of emphasis on the role of conflict, particularly in fragile and conflict affected states. And I agree with the recommendations to adopt conflict sensitive and do no harm approaches to disaster risk reduction. To answer the question I posed a while ago, is collaboration possible? I think fostering collaboration between ethnic groups, and of course with other local and outside actors of disaster risk reduction, is possible if and when there is a space for dialogue to build trust. And this dialogue is possible with the participatory approaches or methodologies. And I think the role of participatory approaches to integrate vulnerable sectors in disaster risk reduction are not uh, are not emphasized in the pre-zero draft, although there are many provisions that encourage collaboration. But what I'm trying to say is I think it is important to specify the general principles of participation to guide the conduct of participatory approaches or methods on the ground or in local communities. I would like to share some of my experiences working mostly with NGOs in the Philippines. Um, Participatory approaches, participatory methods that are being implemented on the ground, uh, I think are not always consistent with the goals for example, of Hugo Framework for Actions and similar international policies, and that focuses on disaster risk reduction. I think there is uh, there is this lost in translation from policy to practice. I think the essence of participation, and those are inclusion and empowerment. For example, in my case, in the Philippines, the marginalized ethnic groups, is not always the main goals of participatory methods or approaches being implemented in the communities. And I always have this impression, not always, but most of the times, that participatory methods are often for compliance purposes only, to the funding agency. Therefore, I think there is a big issue on accountability. And accountability is not always towards the community, but to the funding agency. Uh, and I think this issue of accountability is one of the reasons why there is not much progress on reducing the underlying factors of vulnerability and enhancing capacities, because people are not always, but sometimes they're fully engaged in the process. And I think again, this issue of accountability is also not fully addressed in the pre-zero draft. Now, going back to participation and the participatory methods, it appears to me that the pre-zero draft, as well as other related advocacies and policies that support and promote the idea of participation, lack the methodological components to make their goals achievable. For example, we always acknowledge that participation of local communities promotes sustainable disaster risk reduction, and yet there is a lack of sustainable methodologies to sustain the participation of local communities. Participatory approaches must be sustainable to sustain trust and dialogue among actors. This means that methods and tools must not be the methods and tools that we use, especially in the communities, must not be extractive in nature, and that they should be maintained at the local level and should be replicated by local communities, recognizing, without being dependent. I think it's important to recognize, but without being dependent on the contribution of outside actors, scientists or national governments. Um, as a conclusion, I hope that HFA or the pre-zero draft um, would encourage the scientific community to further study and investigate the roles of ethnicity in determining the vulnerabilities as well as capacities of ethnic groups in the face of disasters. Also, I would like to emphasize the importance of participatory approaches uh, to establish collaboration between ethnic groups in disaster risk reductions and other actors. And I hope that plans, actions, and policies to integrate ethnicity and ethnic groups in disaster risk reduction be institutionalized at different scales. And I think the pre-zero draft is a good start. And finally, I really hope that all these global international advocacies, the HFA and many other policies advocacies, resonate or reach the local communities. I think this is the measure of success. For me, I think this is the measure of success of this post 2015 Yuga framework for action. Uh, I think that's it, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very clear and good points. Let me move on again without further ado to Maureen Fordham, Professor of Gender and Disaster Resilience at the University of Northumbria University in Newcastle.